Anticipating player expectations in any given scene can be hard, but a lot of the time we make it even harder on ourselves by trying to anticipate without stacking the deck in our favor. Thanks for today's topic goes to William Knox and the Tank Class supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, who for a few dollars a month get to decide week after week what questions I'm answering and get to watch them first. Thanks, Tanks. It's important in this particular question that I differentiate to some degree between setting expectations for your campaign and the long-term gameplay arc and the individual scene-by-scene basis. William mentioned that a great place to set expectations for his overall campaign is in his session 0, and I 100% agree. He's already taken care of that, but what he's really interested in is how to set those expectations for any individual given scene moment by moment so that the players can anticipate what's coming and thus he can create the kind of gameplay loop that he's looking for, which is a awesome and great goal to have. When it comes to scene expectations, you really are trying to answer the question of which pillar is this? The whole 3 pillars of play thing gets a little bit of grief in Dungeons & Dragons, but it is a great idea to start thinking about the kind of gameplay that you're going to be involved with. Role-playing in the pillars is honestly kind of a misnomer because most of the time what we're talking about is conversation or dialogue, whereas role-playing is the art of choosing based on being somebody else, which should happen during every pillar of play. Exploration, on the other hand, is more of an investigatory or a learning experience where we're discovering things or finding stuff, and essentially fits in between the dialoguing portions and the last pillar of play, which of course is combat. All 3 of these should intermingle and interweave, so we should never really have an expectation set that one of these things is going to happen and the other ones aren't on the table, because obviously our players are supposed to be somewhat in charge of how they interact with the world and what kind of scene is going to be coming up. But even then, there's still some value in separating out for ourselves the expectations that we have for the scene and then finding a way to telegraph that to our players. And so the biggest and best way to be able to do that is essentially for us to stack the deck in our favor by having already determined what we think that the scene is going to be about, and then by finding ways to show that to the players so that we can tell them what it is without telling them what it is. One of the most potent ways of doing this, in my experience, is to use repetitions. Repetition and routines breeds pattern recognition in the human brain. People are amazingly good at finding patterns even when patterns don't exist. If a handful of things happen coincidentally at the same sort of arc, then same sort of timing, then people's brains see that pattern and recognize it as existing. And we can use that to our advantage as dungeon masters by simply purposefully putting in certain patterns. A couple of those that I've used with good success would be when exploring a dungeon, for instance. I have the maps laid out, and in my case I usually use a virtual tabletop for my online games, my paid games, whereas I use a physical Chessex battle map rolled out for my live games. And when I've got the map drawn out and prepared, I'll use a single token to represent the entirety of the group when they are in an exploration phase, when they're moving from one room to another and it's assumed that the group is together. This not only is a practical thing because having everybody have to manage all their tokens takes away from everybody's attention, but it gives me the opportunity to sort of signal to the group that the situation that they're in is not necessarily one that's instantaneously going to break down into combat, but is an opportunity for them to move from location to location, discovering information. It's an exploration scene. Once I ask for them to place their tokens out on the map where they think they would be, then there's there's this transition in their minds that the scene is now more location specific, more worrisome perhaps, that there might be a trap or combat lurking around the corner. Now, obviously, there's times that I call for changes over to tokens after we've already engaged in something. They've opened the door, the bad guys are visible, where are your tokens? Roll initiative. But it's important that we have that transition moment when I'm trying to change the feel of the game. So if they hear something behind a door that sounds worrisome and they should be concerned, by having them place their tokens out, I'm changing their expectations from this exploration phase into a potential combat upcoming, even if I want to subvert that later by having it be a role-playing encounter on the other side of the door, but I want them to be concerned about it because it's how I feel like that scene should lay out. Another way to set up expectations that I've used is to use specific questions in specific circumstances. Common way to do that is to ask who's in front, or what your marching order is, who's on watch at a given hour of the night. These kinds of questions help to raise the question in the minds of the players as to whether or not this scene is going to pass peacefully or whether or not there's something serious afoot. It helps to draw attention and set the expectation of a higher danger level. Another one is to use what Angry GM has coined the tension pool, which for me I use in time-specific environments and dungeons when there could be wandering danger, or where just spending hours upon hours searching every single nook and cranny could be dangerous to the group. Just the announcement that we are using the tension pool changes the expectations of the group from this is a leisurely, safe location to there is danger afoot and things could go wrong. If you haven't checked out Angry's write-up on the tension pool, then you should. There's probably a link here somewhere. You should go check it out. Outside of routines and repetition, however, there's still a number of ways that you can help your players to understand the idea that you have for the scene that's upcoming. A pretty solid and simple one includes using your voice to control the expectations of the group. Your tone of voice, or the speed with which you're speaking, as well as the posture that you're presenting, can make a big difference in the energy level at the table subconsciously for your players. For instance, something that I learned while watching a little bit of Critical Role that I really liked in a lot of my games is that if you are standing, your energy level is naturally higher. And so when you switch from a laid-back, exploratory, conversational sort of scene and things are starting to get tense, rising to your feet is an excellent way to elevate the tension at the table and make that excitement a little more palpable. As you gain energy and are moving more swiftly and are looming over the table, the energy of your players will shift likewise, even if they are seated at their table. You can likewise use things like a relaxed, laid-back posture to transition and to telegraph to your players that the scene is likewise something that is a little bit less than all of the excitement. Players are good at spotting these things even if they're not intending to do so, but you have to put a lot of effort into it being a active choice and something that you are specifically choosing beforehand with intentionality if you want it to become the kind of thing that regularly sets that scene expectation for your players. Another simple trick is to control your ambience music based upon the kind of scene that you're going to be running. Many, at least, of us have used ambience music to signal combat and to keep the energy level up and exciting, but having a playlist for quiet conversation, for exploration, for tension and concern, for investigation and discovery, and for combat and frenetic action is a great way for you to be able to control the expectations by simply switching the playlists at the appropriate times. By having the music a little bit under your control and by setting the right kind of music, you help to set the scenes in the players' minds. Many of them might notice this specifically, especially since you're going to have to make the specific action to change the scene's music, but many of them might not actually notice it as a conscious thing, and it will just help to shift their expectations behind the scenes, as it were. And there's nothing wrong with either an active, ooh, he's playing the quiet music, like we can calm down and things are safe here, and there's nothing wrong with somebody just subconsciously picking that up as well. As sort of a public service announcement, it is worth noting that it is, of course, acceptable to subvert expectations. Having the quiet music going and then suddenly springing a combat on your players is totally okay, as is setting people up for potential combat and then bringing a tiny little NPC that pipes up in its little tiny voice and distracts and disarms your players into a friendly situation, only to turn things around into an awful combat again later. All of that is totally okay, but it's something that if you're wanting to be able to set your players' expectations, you need to use with care. You can't subvert expectations every single time, or else your players won't know what to expect. And frankly, that usually leads to them checking out of the game a little bit more. When your players are looking at their expectations and are anticipating what's coming next, they tend to be more engaged in the story and in your world as a general rule and in general. Thanks again, William and Tank Class supporters, for selecting this topic. I hope that it was of use to you, and if you have any further questions, as always, drop them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Happy adventuring.